It's all a map for achieving the ultimate things in the world, like peace on earth. I mean, come on.
You'll never be this perfect meta hero, but it's that template, it's that North Star, it's the ultimate role model, basically.
The funny thing about freedom is that the flip side of that coin is responsibility.
The failure is part of trial and error. It's right there in the damn words, right?
Such a focus on secularism, which is this profane world, is making it so that there's no connection with the sacred anymore.
And so it's like mythology is the process of making the collective unconscious, which is another Jungian term, conscious.
It's the third mode of adaptation. It's the alternative to decadence and fascism. Ignoring this stuff is at our own peril.
We are imitative creatures and we need role models. And it's not like a choice. It's not like, oh, I can have one or not have one. It's like you're going to be imitating someone.
Actions of today are going to echo into eternity, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
The myths of 1,000 years from now are being written now.
Yeah.
What are you doing with your life? That's what that says to me.
I would metaphorize Bitcoin as something more like the ark, right? It is the ark that lets us survive the flood. And
it's such a powerful lesson, and it's one that I think society has collectively lost. But individuals might be able to take that up again.
It's a trip, man, to say the least.
Hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, if this is your first time listening to the What is Money Show, I strongly recommend that you go back to episodes 1 through 9 first, which lays a lot of the groundwork for many of the concepts that we explore on the show. These first 9 episodes are my series with Michael Saylor, and thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard, hands down, and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I don't think there's any place better that you can start other than episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The What is Money Show is 100% sponsor based. So all of our revenues are derived from direct sponsorships. And I strive to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically only using sponsors that I use personally, and also choosing sponsors that have values which are well aligned to the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do now is a few ad reads right at the top of the show, and then I'll do a few more ad reads in the middle. And I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as again, these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer.
Today's podcast is brought to you by In Wolf's Clothing. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times per year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that help fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. So go to wolfnyc.com to learn more about the program or apply. Again, that's Wolf NYC, WOLFNYC.com. I'm going to read an excerpt from Jordan Peterson's book, Maps of Meaning. And this is on page 369 in your physical copy. This is page 376 in my PDF copy. And this is under the subheading, Heroic Adaptation, Voluntary Reconstruction of the Map of Meaning. Peterson writes, the Bible, considered as a single story, presents this process of maturation in mythological terms. The Old Testament offers group identity codified by Moses as antidote for the fallen state of man. This antidote, while useful, is incomplete. Even Moses himself, a true ancestral hero, fails to reach the promised land. The New Testament, by contrast, offers identification with the hero as the means by which the fallen state and the problems of group identity might be both permanently transcended. The New Testament has been traditionally read as a description of a historical event which redeemed mankind once and for all. It might more reasonably be considered the description of a process that, if enacted, could bring about the establishment of peace on earth. Very important passage, and very bold claim that if we enacted this, I guess, Christic way of being, that we could actually bring about peace on earth.
Yeah, I mean, I think this whole book has been hurtling towards this chapter, building, going through all of the steps of how the mythological systems of the world have explained the lessons of history, and then ultimately getting to this point of saying it's all a map for achieving the ultimate things in the world, like peace on earth. I mean, come on. And I mean, I think the whole thing here is that the thesis of the book appears to be that Dr. Peterson has realized what the Bible is actually saying. And I don't take the Bible as the only source that does this, but it's important enough to look at it from the perspective of this is the Western canon. This is the religious underpinning of Western civilization.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to take this and look at it from a totally different perspective, which then can shed new light on what this really is, I think it, first of all, gives new appreciation to, certainly for me it did, it gives new appreciation to the Bible, Christian philosophy more generally, and then gives a actual blueprint for how to live in the world, to achieve the most possible as an individual and contribute to a world which is a better place to live in. And I think that's incredibly optimistic.
Yeah. You mentioned obviously we're focusing a lot on the story of Christ because that is the meta hero of our current paradigm, basically our current civilizational paradigm in the West, right? Not to detract from others in other cultures. And in preparing for this, I looked at the recurrence of Christ-like figures in mythology. That, Christ is obviously a very specific story, but there have been similar stories told historically. So, while no one can draw like exact parallels between any two religions, there do seem to be a lot of thematic elements with the story of Jesus that are shared in various mythologies. So, for instance, the Son of God, right? Jesus is the Son of God. Well, this was also true for Horus, as we've talked about earlier in this series. Also true for Hercules, and true for Thor, something you're probably near and dear to your heart, which would be, what is the religion that Thor is associated with? Is escaping Norse mythology. Thank you.
Odin. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're all the sons of a major deity. So that's kind of a non-monotheistic, but a familial dynamic in the mythology. There's also, and I wasn't sure where this individual comes from, but the healer. So obviously Christ was a healer. He performed miracles. He healed people of their diseases. This aspect of Christ was described in the story of Asclepius. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Also Apollo in his resurrection and ascension. And yeah, so the resurrection and ascension even is not unique to Christianity per se. Also, Hercules, we mentioned earlier, ascended to godhood in Olympus long before Jesus did. Dionysus died and was resurrected to become a minor god. Osiris was another one, etc. So there seems to be this recurrent pattern of the meta hero emerging in different wisdom traditions, and the family relation is interesting, right? It's sort of speaking to, well, there's a lot of mythological connotations here, but really this, I guess, the metaphor you use, right? The blueprint for ideal human action, or what we've said in previous episodes, the owner's manual for being a human, right? Like, you own your body and your mind and your spirit, and these mythological narratives are basically a manual for how to operate that system effectively in the world, morally, competently, in a way that maximally benefits from all of the lessons we have crystallized about reflecting upon ourselves and our actions across the longest spans of time. And it's the term consilience comes up here for me, that, it's not just one story, right? Which might lead you to believe that, oh, this is just some fairy tale someone made up and they want us to act this way. But these same themes, these same patterns of action have been represented in many mythological figures across time, right? So Christ is not necessarily even the latest, but the greatest from the perspective of Western civilization. But there have been many of these meta hero figures that have embodied many similar episodic patterns of action across time. And so if you take those stories collectively, there's kind of this consilience on the Christ consciousness, for lack of a better term, right? It's like the way of being that is optimal for human beings.
Yeah, and the consilience, I love that term. And I think the reason that is so powerful, and that Peterson's work, Eliades, that he builds on a lot, is showing all of this, the parallels throughout cultures. And the funny thing is, there's an argument in atheist circles, essentially, that the parallels to other religious traditions out there in Christianity is a reason to disbelieve it. There was this documentary Zeitgeist when I was going through some teenage exploration of my religious upbringing and some rebellion towards against that. And this Zeitgeist, which is an interesting documentary in its own right, and sort of gets a lot of ideas that are found in Bitcoin these days. It gets enough right, but just enough wrong as well. The guy didn't really quite get there. But the one part of the documentary was about how, especially the Horus story was really a parallel to Jesus Christ, and that got me thinking, well, okay, it's just copying some older mythology, something like that. So you can just dismiss it, right? So I could just dismiss it. But the thing was, I got it backwards. I got it wrong. It was that this parallel story, this archetypal narrative that explains something real. This entire book, Maps of Meaning, to me has been about explaining the reality of all of the mythology and all of the narratives, explaining the real thing underneath that and the lessons to be learned from it. And the parallels are additive. They don't discount one another. They don't say that this one religion is wrong because there are others that say the same thing. It says, no, all of it is right. All of it is right. And of course, there can be narratives that don't say anything archetypal, and those can be not discarded exactly, but they don't have the same relevance or resonance. And there are religious traditions that get captured and go down a wrong path because they become about power and human control. And none of that is to say that religions that co-opt the powerful narratives should be followed blindly. The narratives on their own, though, give us the owner's manual.
Yes.
And learning that lesson was the powerful thing for me. Learning that lesson was the powerful outcome of reading Maps of Meaning, was that I could understand that this stuff was actually saying something real, not something to be discarded.
That's so good. Yeah, I mean, it's funny you wanted to dismiss that because you thought it was an imitation, right? And that there is a negative connotation when we say imitation, right? Imitator, imitation, like imitation crab comes up for me. I don't know if you've ever had that at a sushi restaurant. It's like
California roll.
Yeah, terrible artificial stuff. But a book that I was led to in the Bitcoin rabbit hole was Girard's Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World. And, his big argument, I've probably brought it up 10,000 times throughout the series because there's so many connections. It's just, that imitation is essential to human action, basically. That's how humans mature. That's how we develop. That's why we are the average of the 5 people we spend the most time around. That's why we are the products of our environment, et cetera, et cetera. And I think you see this, and so mythology is bound up with this imitative characteristic of humans. And it's almost like we're leveraging our imitative capability. As the opening line says in Girard's book from Aristotle, is that man excels all other animals in his ability to imitate. And so we're like leveraging this characteristic that we have to our own benefit through these stories. And so I'll try to explain what I mean by that. Like, I even see this on Bitcoin Twitter and content creation, right? We're constantly imitating one another. Like, I see someone release a new, Lynn Alden releases this video, the 30-minute video explaining her book, Broken Money. She's going through kind of the, what is money, why gold, how we got to the petrodollar system, how we got to the fiat system, explaining money's linkages to energy. And, it's a 30-minute video that's giving you kind of like the highest level overview of the history of money. It's really, really good. But throughout, there's many phrases, many sentences I've heard, from other pieces of writing, other people talking. Like, she's obviously reading and writing and assimilating all of these people's work. And I'm not picking on her in particular. I'm saying we all do this. Like, I do it, you do it, we all do it. It's the human thing, basically. It's how we learn. And so you see over time, I mean, since 2017, I've really been paying attention to this. I've seen the Bitcoin narrative through each iteration of this imitation, regurgitation, if you want to say that. It becomes stronger and sharper and more precise. And you're assimilating more people's input and viewpoints in each new asset, right? Whether that's a written piece, whether that's a video, whether that's just another podcast episode, right? Someone else's diatribe on Bitcoin and its benefits. And so through this process of imitation in the Bitcoin content creation space / Bitcoin Twitter, the Bitcoin myth becomes more powerful, right? It becomes more truthful, actually. And that, again, I want to be careful here because myth typically resonates as synonymous with untruth for most people, but that could not be further from the truth, as we've explored in this series. That myth is more like this very deep truth about how, taking the many, many, many stories about a thing or us and sort of compressing it into one story that's distilled down all of the key lessons while dispensing with all the noise or the detritus or anything that's extraneous, right? It's like compressing, you're really getting the distillate important information in a very small package. And I see that process playing out in Bitcoin land here and on the internet. And that, so what is that doing? I don't know. What we were saying about how to tie this back to Christ, is that we're very imitative creatures. We're using myth to compress all of this data to get the very important aspects or lessons that are worthy of incorporation into our patterns of action. And so myth is like giving us these figures that are worthy of imitation, right? Which I would say Christ is that. And again, it doesn't matter, in my view, if that's a real human, if that's totally made up, if that's God, not God. No matter how you paint the historicity or the theological quality of this individual, it is a role model worthy of imitation, and that he embodies optimal human consciousness and optimal human action. And so that's the technology, like it's the technology, you could call it that if you want to be very secular about it, right? It's like a moral software package, something like that. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Well, I completely agree in the sense of the funny thing about that calling it a technology, I agree with everything you just said, but the funny thing about calling it a technology and having to secularize it and everything just shows how much this stuff is being discarded, right?
Right.
There is a distinction between the secular and so-called religious things, that there just has to be this separation, and I think that it's a religion that was originally separated from the state, and now there's this idea of the secular and religious, but the distinction really is the sacred and the profane, where the sacred is everything that you can connect to, that is the numinous, the higher order good, right? And that would be considered something special, the sacred. And the profane world is the everyday world that people live in most of the time, right? But the thing is, such a focus on secularism, which is this profane world, is making it so that there's no connection with the sacred anymore. And so it's entirely throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Just to, we've talked about metaphors constantly in this series, and that's a fun one. But no, like the point is that learning to connect again with the idea of the sacred, I think, is one of the critical things that humanity, that individuals need to learn how to undertake again in order for us as a collective, the groups of individuals who are actually trying to do something good with their lives and therefore the world. This is what we all need to do.
Yeah.
I think. And I don't mean that in exactly a prescriptive way, as in to say everyone must do this thing. That's exactly against the ethos of what I'm talking about. It is saying that the world collective owner's manual, the collective lessons of the mythology, is telling us that this is what we need to do. Connect with the sacred, connect with the highest good, imitate Christ, imitate the hero, imitate the savior. That's the entire point of this book, and it's such a powerful lesson, and it's one that I think society has collectively lost, but individuals might be able to take that up again.
Amen to that. The Sacred and the Profane is also a title of an excellent book by Iliad, or Iliade. I'm not sure. I've heard different pronunciations of his name. I've only read pieces of it. I haven't read all of it, but I've heard it's one of his best works. I read his History of Religious Ideas. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, the tome.
Yeah, right. I've read volume 1 of that. It's excellent, man. It really, if you're interested in these ideas, that goes deep, right? It talks about this relationship. Really, the recurring theme was, as technological landscape changes, mythological landscape is like an echo of that. And so it is like this technology we're describing, that people use these stories to reflect upon themselves and their progression through time, space, technological paradigms, and to create hierarchies of value and organize themselves, right? It's like it's part and parcel of being human. It's not something that can be dispensed with, I don't think. I think it's inexorably bound to human consciousness. That's my personal conclusion. And I think too, this dichotomy between individualism and collectivism, I just think it's wrong, honestly. I think that's what the Christ story is teaching us in many ways, is like, if you really want to optimize for collective well-being or the greater good, well, then you have to optimize how individuals act in the real world. And Christ, it's difficult to semantically articulate that, but the story of Christ gives us that procedural pattern to imitate, to emulate. Right? Obviously, it's in semantic form, it's written down, but there's a reason Christ speaks in parables and uses metaphors. And, I think Peterson later writes, he's basically cutting through all these Gordian knots of moral dilemmas through action, right? It's like, and again, this is why those bracelets were popular in the 90s, right? What would Jesus do? WWJD. It's like asking yourself in every moment, oh, I'm facing one of these conundrums. How should I deal with this? And then you can actually look into the Word and see and draw inspiration from the way Christ would have acted in that situation. So, yeah, I mean, I agree. We're at like the crescendo of this book in a way. And it's what is it? The Great Commandment? Is that what it's called? Where Christ says, love God above all else and love thy neighbor as thyself. And it's really kind of that simple. And, again, God could just be the unknown, the creative principle, the principle of life itself. It's like, hold that as your highest value, the process of life, rather than any of its products. And then love your neighbor as yourself. It's like, just get universal respect for life, liberty, and property, as I would repackage that in a libertarian format. And that's it, right? That's the basis. That's the basis of civilization. Maybe there's different ways to spin that, explain that, but in so few words, I think that's about as best as I can put it together. And it's worked really well, right? It's like, okay, not only is this just some idea we had, let's give it a shot. It's like, well, we can also look at the societies that have really organized themselves in this way. All right, those that have respected life, liberty, and property, how successful have they been? And then when they have stopped respecting life, liberty, and property, how quickly have they regressed? So we have this pattern, we have this blueprint, we have this owner's manual. It is in Christ. And it's not theological, which is so tricky to talk about, because you're like, I'm not trying to get anyone to convert to anything. I actually don't care what you profess to believe. It's just, do you enact this pattern of action or not, right? Do you respect the life, liberty, and property of others or not? It almost doesn't matter what you propositionally state your beliefs to be. It just matters how you act in the real world. And so, I hope this gives people a sense of how important these stories really are, right? I don't know what Knut's take on, if he's listened to any of this series yet, but
yes, I can confirm that. Yeah, he's got
even Richard Dawkins, right? I told you I interviewed him last week. He even has recently admitted, right, the father of rational atheism, that he is culturally a Christian. And right, it's almost undeniable. It's like, do you have a bank account? Do you own a car? Do you own a house? Like, do you not murder people? Well, then you have some cultural Christian acculturation in you.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is the layering thing that we talked about earlier. You can't escape it. And the thing is, I think the people get hung up on the buzzword of Christ. And as you say, this isn't a specific theology or anything. And the best part about this book was that it freed me to be open to these ideas, because I was so hung up on that I wouldn't touch anything that was Christian or that was related to Christ. And the thing is, I still don't consider myself a Christian or a believer. Culturally Christian, yes, absolutely. But I beyond appreciate it and respect it. I do think it is exactly as we're talking about. It's this heroic mode of being. And that is the thing that this book unlocked for me, is understanding what those stories actually meant, and the heroic mode of being is something to strive for. And the individual versus collective point on that, the funny thing about freedom is that the flip side of that coin is responsibility.
Yeah.
And there is a right way to act in the world. I assert that. Everyone should have the freedom to do whatever they want, but you're going to get drastically different results if you act in different ways. And first of all, not respecting life, liberty, and property, that should get a necessary reaction against those types of actions, just to get that out of the way. But even someone who does respect those things but doesn't act in a way that is heroic, acts in all of the ways that are what we talked about last time, fascistic versus decadent, something like that, like these forms of being that are counter to human flourishing, counter to individuals flourishing, being heroic, all this. Those are wrong modes of being, in my view, and that this is the central lesson. This central lesson of follow the highest good that you can conceive of, follow the heroic path. And here's a great example of the heroic path. And actually, if you want to respond to that, but the very next paragraph from the what you first read to start this off here, I think actually really gets into it. Do you mind if I
please?
Yeah. So it says that the problem is, however, that this process, referring back to the everything from the Old Testament, New Testament here, this process cannot yet really be said to be consciously, that is, explicitly understood. Furthermore, if actually undertaken, it's extremely frightening, particularly in the initial stages. In consequence, the imitation of Christ, or the central culture hero of other religious systems, tends to take the form of ritualistic worship, separated from other non-religious aspects of life. Voluntary participation in the heroic process, by contrast, which means courageous confrontation with the unknown, makes quote-unquote worship a matter of true identification. This means that the true quote-unquote believer rises above dogmatic adherence to realize the soul of the hero, to incarnate that soul in every aspect of his day-to-day life. So, I mean, I take that just as transcend the religion and act as the hero in your day-to-day life. It's hard to do. It's impossible, I would say. Striving for that is worthwhile.
Yes. Like the term from math class comes to mind, the asymptote, right? It can never reach the line or reach zero, but it asymptotically approaches it. All right, this is the curve that gets gradually closer to the line, never reaches it, but it's just that ideal that we're trying to imitate, right? None of us will ever be Christ. Like, you'll never be this perfect meta hero, but it's that template, it's that North Star, it's the ultimate role model, basically. And in just trying to walk in those footsteps, you will bring out the best version of yourself. And it's a big and. This, codifying this in words, right? The word, as it's said in the Bible, you're, I guess, being offered up kind of a semantic knowledge in a way that every action that you take in accordance with these principles or these precepts is a step toward not only making yourself the best version of yourself, but making the world the best version of the world, right? You are then setting the example, right? You are the torchbearer. You are carrying that example further out into the world and through history, through your actions. You are imitating that which is most worthy of imitation. And when you set that example for those around you, well, then other people pick up the torch, right? And the fire spreads. And so, it's not just about getting you and your act together and cleaning up your room, as Peterson might say, but it's encouraging others to do the same, or influencing others to do the same. And when everyone starts acting that way, the world becomes a much richer, in both a literal material sense and a figurative spiritual sense, a much richer, more peaceful, more cooperative, more productive, more flourishing place to be. And it's really just, again, to restate that in libertarian terminology, it's what you said, right? Live free, right? Be free to do whatever you want. Just don't create any victims and don't become a victim, right? Take responsibility for your actions. And do not coerce, do not steal, do not kill, right? The very basic commandments. And that's it, right? It's very easy to say. Obviously, we've said it probably 1,000 times in this series, but it's such a deep idea, or a deep, I don't even know, it's almost like beyond an idea, right? It's a procedural wisdom, I think, as Peterson calls it later. It's the essence of being human. It's the essence of what pulls us out of our animality and into our civility, basically. And yeah, it's right there, right? It's right there. It's open source code. It's there for you to imitate. It's there for you to adopt in your life. It's there for you to set the example for others in your life. And it's beautiful, right? I mean, even in this really kind of secular sense that we're trying to describe it, it's beautiful, right? I mean, it's beauty in the philosophical sense, right? Like appearances that reveal truth. This is the revelation of truth about who we are. We're looking at the word and the text, and it's telling us the truth about who we are. And we can incorporate that truth into our life. That's a beautiful thing. And change the world around us, change the people around us. Like, that is beautiful, beautiful in the truest sense.
I love it. And, the funny thing about this is us discussing this right now as, I would say we're both pretty far along this journey in again, trying to speak with humility and saying this and all that, but like pretty far along the journey of sort of understanding these ideas. And yet it's constantly hard. That's actually the point I'm trying to make. It's constantly hard. Taking responsibility is not easy. And letting other people pay for life and just letting the world happen around you is such an easy thing to do. And I think there's so many reasons why individuals don't see that the system around all of us is just completely broken, and don't latch on to that the answer is in all of us. Take responsibility. Bitcoin fixes this is a nice sentiment, and certainly Bitcoin will fix the fiat financial system, but it doesn't change that the ultimate truth is to take responsibility. And in doing so, that leads to the ultimate fulfillment, which is living a life in the most heroic way possible, finding that thing, the ikigai, that this cross section of all of the things that make you happy, that affect the world, that is actually valuable, because if something, it doesn't matter how interested you are in some little niche thing, if it's not valuable to someone else, well, maybe you need a day job in addition to that PhD or something like that. But but that's the point, though, is that Bitcoin can take away all of the distortion, right? All of the intentional violence being done against every individual, the theft of purchasing power, which is a microaggression or an aggression, because I don't like that term either, microaggression. But Bitcoin can fix that, but Bitcoin can't fix that everyone needs to find their cross to bear, take it up, and follow the heroic path.
Yeah. For sure. And what came up for me there is like, you could almost say that Bitcoin fixes this is roughly equivalent to saying empowered, ethical individuals fix this. Right? Because it's not Bitcoin per se that's doing just the protocol, right? Of course, we're part of this system, right? There's the protocol layer, the social layer, which is this is also complicated to talk about Bitcoin. And this is why Bitcoin is mythological, right? We are co-participants or core components of this technology, right? It's not just this thing running on computers, like we holding it, participating in it, building on it, like we're part of it. Like the internet, right? The internet is not a thing without humans. Well, neither is Bitcoin. And so by empowering individualism or the individual, right, to stand against collectives, and by incentivizing ethicality, right? Like it's, again, the life, liberty, property thing is like, well, you can't steal it. So the incentives for killing go down. And so do the incentives for then incarcerating, and that it's property, right? So it's very difficult to see. So you get this sort of I don't know, a system that it encourages people to respect life, liberty, and property, which again is kind of the basic ethos we're exploring here. And so I don't know, we can then correct. And then Peterson goes on to write here, which I thought this was interesting. I'll read this excerpt. He wrote, I'm on page 377 in my PDF. Our petty weaknesses accumulate and multiply and become the great evils of state. As our technological power expands, the danger we pose increases, and the consequences of our voluntary stupidity multiply. It is increasingly necessary that we set ourselves, not others, right, and that we learn explicitly what that means. So, the state seems to be like this. Again, you said it's hard to be responsible. It's hard to admit you were wrong. It's hard to, reconcile yourself to truth. The ego wants to defend itself and resist all these things. And I think the accumulation of all these micro missings of the mark, right? The micro sins or sins over time, they accumulate into this institutionalized form we call the state. And eventually that thing deviates from the actual moral consensus of individuals in a way, right? And there's some reconciliation, some judgment day that thing has to be reset. And, to the extent that individuals are empowered to stand against collectives, I don't really know how else to say it, right? To just form their own consensus free from coercion, not a social consensus driven by coercion, but rather one driven by consent. That's the ideal towards which we are moving, and that is the ideal which Bitcoin largely enables, right? It's very more enabling of that movement than I think almost anything other than maybe the story of Christ himself, right?
Oh, that's a great point as well. And actually, I was just going to say that, well, the story of Christ is, okay, the mythology fixes this or whatever. The archetypal mythology would be a very clunky way of saying that, but that's one thing. You can go back and say electricity fixes this, fire fixes this, like fire fixes this.
Layers.
Exactly. Like it's first it's the problem of needing shelter or whatever, everyone's going to freeze to death, and then electricity does all these other things, the wheel, etc. And so Bitcoin is just another technology in that stack, right? But then it still comes down to individuals who have to do the action, right?
Yeah.
The thing is the doomsday that you mentioned there. I mean, this is just bringing it back to incentives, because it all comes down to incentives, and I think ultimately Bitcoin really fixes the incentives. I think that's the core message here. But the game theory that plays out, right, when the incentives are that elected officials have to be reelected, so they have to promise shiny things, shiny goodies to the electorate in order to get reelected, well, then there's never going to be the long-term planning and thinking that actually says we have to deal with these problems that are inherent in the system. No one is fixing Social Security or old age security or whatever it's called in their country of choice. No one's fixing that because that's going to be electorally unpopular. And so it's going to get to the, what's the term, like the max pain point. I think that's
breaking point. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's going to blow up in the worst possible way everywhere, except for these places that find the exit gate, right?
Yeah.
And again, it still comes down to individuals acting against their incentives, because this is the problem. The politicians are still individuals operating on incentives.
Mm-hmm.
And it's as if this entire system is just playing out. And to the extent to which this gets to a little bit of determinism, right? How much choice does any individual have in the system if the incentives are set up in a certain way, right? And I mean, before Bitcoin, I was on the typical fiat track: get the house, get the mortgage, get the car, maybe have the couple of kids, working on that part. But still, now it's like, well, I feel like I'm out of the fiat rat race, at least mentally. I still have a fiat job personally, but I mean, I'm directing energy to something new here, and then Bitcoin itself is the way out. And I mean, I don't expect any kind of retirement, pension, anything in the future. I believe that will not exist when it's time for me to so-called retire. I don't even believe in that concept anymore. Taking it easy after you've accumulated enough resources to do so, I think is a good goal. But not needing to do it is different from becoming completely idle. But I'm rambling a little bit. But yeah, the Bitcoin fixes this thing. It fixes the incentives, and right now the incentives are that no one's going to fix it until they're forced.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And delayed volatility is amplified volatility, right? So the Social Security program, well, it is bankrupt, it's insolvent, it doesn't work, yet no one will remove it because there's it's politically unpopular, basically, right? To try and remove that or call it, or to reconcile it to truth, basically, and say, hey, this thing's insolvent, we have to do something with this program. Instead, just like zombie companies, that it gets papered over and, the house of cards gets duct taped together, so on and so forth into the future until there's a catastrophic collapse, right? Whereas if volatility were allowed to express itself before it accumulated into this conflagration, this is the classic example of having the micro forest fires over time prevents the conflagration that burns away the topsoil and prevents anything new from growing back. Right? Again, delayed volatility is amplified volatility. So in our attempt to dampen volatility in the short run, we're actually amplifying it in the long run and causing ourselves harm. And this is all of this foolishness, right? Even if it's done under the pretenses of moral superiority or the greater good, whatever, you are still stealing from productive people to pay for non-productive things. And that is going, as surely as if you jump off a 50-story building, you're going to hit the ground, is as surely as this will blow up, right? It is economically unavoidable. Yet, here we are, right? Keynesian world, thinking we can flap our arms and fly, and it's not going to work.
Have you ever wanted to live in an off-grid community with complete food, energy, and water independence? If so, then you need to check out the farm at Okefenokee. The farm is a pioneering community designed to foster longevity and well-being, eliminating elements that detract from these goals. At the farm, the convergence of nature, nutritious food, a supportive community, and the ethos of slowing down is unparalleled. Positioned at the gateway to the UNESCO World Heritage-nominated Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, the farm at Okefenokee stands as a testament to a lifestyle that truly nurtures health and happiness. Unlike conventional housing developments where a token communal garden may suffice, the farm itself is the community. Small, intimate microvillages seamlessly integrate into the fabric of a sprawling agricultural community. So if you're interested in joining this off-grid community, then go to okefarm.com today to learn more about becoming a member. Make sure to tell them that I sent you for a $21,000 discount on their custom cabin pricing. Again, go to okefarm.com to learn more about joining this revolutionary regenerative agriculture community. Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. I'd like to thank my friends at Swan Bitcoin for their long-standing support of the What is Money show. Swan's mission is to help millions of people get into Bitcoin, so they built the best solution to set up recurring Bitcoin buys and automatic withdrawals into cold storage. With the Swan app, it takes just 2 minutes to sign up and start buying Bitcoin. If you're a new customer, you get $10 in free Bitcoin for signing up, and the first $10,000 of Bitcoin you buy incurs 0 fees. If you're an existing Swan customer, then the next $10,000 of Bitcoin you buy now incurs 0 fees. So if you love to recommend Bitcoin to friends and family, then Swan is the best place to start. So go to swanbitcoin.com/breedlove to get started today. Again, that's swanbitcoin.com/breedlove.
I wanted to read, this is kind of just foreshadowing, I think, because we're not going to get into alchemy today, but I wanted to read this passage, just given that it's on this page, and it really sets up what I think is, for me, although this is the crescendo of the book, the alchemy section is the most fascinating part of the book, and the most connected to Bitcoin, which is really just, mind-blowing to say the least. So I'll set this up by saying, this is my view, alchemy is something like Christ properly understood, as we have talked about it today, right? The meta hero, this, blueprint for being human, the optimal human consciousness or pattern of action, that alchemy is something like the pursuit of Christic principles through science. And really, alchemy existed before science, so that's not exactly a good description, but the alchemists kind of, the church thought that Christ was the final redeemer, and the alchemists said, you know what, there's still a lot of poverty in the world, there's still a lot of disease, maybe there's something we can figure out in the laboratory of nature that would help contribute to solving all of this, right? So they forked off of the church, and alchemy the alchemical methodology was the precursor to the scientific method. Alchemy is where we get the science of chemistry, right? So where we get the name chemistry. And so this fork from religion became science. And they were aimed at discovering the Philosopher's Stone, which was the principles of Christ instantiated in like a tool or a substance. And so, anyways, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I'll just read this passage. Peterson writes, alchemy, considered most generally as the precursor of modern chemistry, was in fact a 20 centuries, that's 2,000 years, long endeavor to understand the transformations of matter. The alchemical matter, however, was not the matter of modern science, logically enough, as the ancient alchemists practiced in the absence of the presumptions and tools of modern science. It was a substance more like the Tao, that which produced or constituted the flux of being. Something more like information in the modern sense, if information may be considered latent in unexplored places.
something more like the unknown as such, something like the matrix of being. Investigation of this intrinsically compelling matter, this unknown, produced a series of internal transformations in the alchemical psyche, making it ever more akin to the philosopher's stone, something that could turn base matter into spiritual gold, something that had, in addition, the eternal, durable, and indestructible nature of stone. As the alchemical endeavor progressed through the Christian era, the stone became increasingly assimilated to Christ, the cornerstone rejected by the builders, the agent of voluntary transformation, whose actions eternally transform the fallen world into paradise. The late-stage alchemist posited that a personality that had completely assimilated the spirit of the unknown was equivalent to Christ. So, yeah, this idea of alchemy as like, I guess the pursuit of maximally energizing the heroic individual. Right? Like, how do we have this pattern, Christ, the ultimate individual. How do we scale Christ? Like, how do you get, we have the role model, we have the blueprint, so to speak. Now, how do you put that blueprint into production, to use a technology metaphor? And the church was, we'll just preach it to the pulpit, get people to read the book and blah, blah, blah. And the alchemists were like, there's got to be something else. There's got to be more to this. And they set out to create science. Carl Jung described alchemy as the science, alchemy as the dream from which science was born. And this was practiced over the course of 2,000 years, as Peterson said, all over the world. Right? This was in China, this was in the Middle East, this was in Europe, this was all over the place. And so, anyways, just setting the stage for the real rabbit hole for me in this book that we'll get into probably next time. And the connections to Bitcoin are deeply fascinating.
Yeah, I won't add too much more, but yeah, because as you say, we'll cover it in depth next time. But it's just crazy. I was the same when I got to this point. It's like, what? And I mean, alchemy is sort of one of these things. It's pseudoscientific by its nature, but at the same time, it's got so much there in terms of analytical things to analyze and lessons to take out of it. There's parallels to everything else in the book, and yeah, it's just like it. The book gets to this point of really coming to its own thesis and everything, but then it's just one more layer on top of it, and the Bitcoin are going to be fun. So yeah, excited for that.
Yeah, once you think your mind has been thoroughly blown, it's like one more detonation. It's crazy. Okay, should we go to, you had the third mode of adaptation highlighted here. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's actually basically coming directly out here. I mean, honestly, I think we've summarized a lot of what this chapter is actually going to have. It's not chapters, just a section of a chapter, but we've discussed this before, that this book probably should have had 12 or 15 or something chapters instead. But this section, I think we've summarized it pretty well. But I do like actually getting into the passages themselves. It's showing the proof of work, so to say, something like that. That this is really the ideas in there, and so I've highlighted a few more passages, including a couple of really big ones, I think, that communicate the messages of the book so effectively. But just starting from the next one, did you want to read it or?
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, all right. So this is my page 370, but it's right after the alchemy passage you read. So the third mode of adaptation, alternative to decadence and fascism, is heroic. Heroism is comparatively rare because it requires voluntary sacrifice of group-fostered certainty and indefinite acceptance of consequent psychological chaos attendant upon re-exposure to the unknown. This is nonetheless the creative path, leading to new discovery or reconfiguration comprising the living element of culture. The creative actor adopts the role of hero and places himself beyond, even in opposition to, the protective enclave of history. In consequence, he suffers re-exposure to the terrible unknown. Such re-exposure engenders mortal terror, but allows for union with possibility, allows for inspiration, reconstruction, and advancement. It's the disintegration and disinhibition of meaning, preceding its reintegration. Occurrences necessarily attendant upon the heroic process that produce the phenomena linking genius in the popular imagination with insanity. The genius and the lunatic are separated, however, by their relative position with regard to the unknown. The genius is the fortunate hero who faces the unexpected consequences of his insufficiently adapted behavior voluntarily on ground that he has chosen. The unfortunate madman, by contrast, has run away from something carnivorous, something that thrives on neglect and grows larger, something that will finally devour him. The genius dissolves, is flooded with indeterminate meaning, and then is reconstituted, then dissolves, floods, and reconfigures the social world. The psychotic dissolves and drowns in the flood. Bam. Yeah, did you want to respond to that?
Well, it's just this fine line, right, between... It kind of, I mean, it reminds me of a number of things. One, there's a quote by someone, I always forget, I'm so bad at attribution, but an expert hits a target no one else can hit, a genius hits a target no one else can see. You know, like it's something like that. It's they're moving the Overton window, right? There's something that's not even within the spectrum of perceived possibility that the genius sort of advances us toward. And then it also reminded me of the book Leela by Robert Pirsig, where he talks about talks about the Brujo, which is like this Native American that had interacted with, you know, the white man and his tribe. Initially, I forget the exact story. He was kidnapped or something when he was young, so he had picked up English and some cultural qualities from white people, and then he was returned back to Native American tribe, and he was sort of shunned because he had, you know, picked up these qualities from a culture that was not his native culture. But then eventually, you know, he was shunned, he was tortured, he was kind of exiled from the group. But then eventually, as white people encroached more and more into Native American territory, he became the mayor eventually because he had this ability to communicate. And so it was like this, the moral of the story there is like, you never know what type of adaptation is going to be necessary. So what might seem foolish and crazy, which might seem like a lunatic to you today, could one day become the genius, right? Like, and you just don't know, right? So you don't know how the landscape of reality is going to shift. You don't know what conditions you're going to need to adapt to. So what might seem extraneous or useless could be the most useful thing at some point. And it seems like the trick of, and maybe this is just the ongoing, you know, necessarily endless dynamic struggle, is society or civilization trying to figure out, well, who's the genius and who's the lunatic, right? Who are advancing the ideas that we actually need to incorporate to adapt successfully, and who is taking us the wrong direction, basically. These agents that operate at the edges, some of them are going to take us the right direction, some are going to take us the wrong direction. And it's you know, getting separating the wheat from the chaff, as Peterson might say.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting that you can't really know in which version you are until you play it out, right? Like,
no, you can't.
But what's the alternative? And that's the beginning of the passage. That's the part that actually I think is even more important than the rest of it. It's the third mode of adaptation. It's the alternative to decadence and fascism, which just to be clear from last time, those were specific terms defined a specific way. It's not necessarily talking about political fascism, but these are modes of acting against everything that is creative and good. And this third mode of adaptation, once going beyond the group, the group identification, because I mean, not to be harsh exactly, but that's NPCs. That's the NPC meme. People who identify only with their group and think nothing outside of it. And that's not a bad place to be for many people necessarily, if life is reasonably okay, but you can't deal with new information, basically, is the result. And then there's the path of becoming the fully integrated individual, and that's being explored. That's this shamanic journey, this rabbit hole. The Bitcoin rabbit hole paralleling a shamanic journey is one of my favorite parts that we've covered in this series. But then you have to adapt to new information, and this is sort of the stage where there's a choice. Act in a way that is counter to those adaptations, to people who are actively attempting to carve this path, or take it up yourself, right? And what has to be understood here is that not everyone is going to be the peak of the Pareto distribution, right? The ultimate person to lead humanity into a new heroic age, something like that. But everyone has the capability to act in a heroic way. And genius and madness, I mean, it's really tough. There's a lot of hard pills to swallow in this book. And because so many of the things in this book can directly point to a person and say, this is what you're doing wrong. Or can go ahead and say, well, read some stories and you'll see exactly what you're doing wrong. But the point is the same. But this one is also difficult, right? It's that even if you get all the way to the point of figuring out that carving a heroic path is the right thing to do, maybe you're the madman. And so that's tough. But I think it's better than being the decadent or being the fascist.
Yeah, I guess coming up for me here, so we've talked about the heroes kind of exemplifying the process of adaptation, right? And so you never want to mess with that. You never want to mess with the process, because that's what we're trying to optimize for, is the process itself. But then, and I don't know if I'm exactly correct here, but it seems like the genius or the lunatic would almost be the potential products of that process. Right? It's like the hero is the mechanism of adaptation. Well, in engaging in heroic behavior, you could end up the lunatic, actually. Right? You could be coming up with something that's either just taking us the wrong direction technologically or whatever it may be, or you could be the genius, right? You could be coming up with the next thing that's going to become the new technological paradigm or whatever it may be. And so you're right. You can't know that until you do it, or you really don't know it until with the benefit of hindsight, ultimately, because I don't know, VHS versus Betamax, right? There's two different groups trying to put forth this medium of, watching video media, and they have to compete in the marketplace before one wins out and one loses. And you don't really know like which one was the genius and which one was the lunatic until, proverbial lunatic, until it shakes out. And so there again seems to be a very close connection with technological reality, right? Where it's like, okay, the genius in the age of hunters and gatherers is probably the guy that can throw the spear the best. Like, oh, he's a genius. Every time he goes out, he brings home kilos or pounds of meat. But the genius in the digital age is someone, much more like the archetypal genius we would associate now, right? Like the brainiac type person. And so it really depends, like who is most productive and competent in the context of the technological reality that they inhabit, right? Or the era that they inhabit. And so that's what comes up for me there. I don't know if that's exactly correct, but it's something like that. Like it's the process of adaptation is going to have misfires, right? That's what trial and error is, right? You have trial, you have errors that you discard, and then eventually you have a success that you would keep, right? If it works, keep it. If it doesn't, discard it. So this seems to be like part and parcel of this kind of genius and lunatic thing.
Well, I think the point to that some of these things work and some of them must be discarded is that everyone needs to understand, the individual listening to the series, reading this book, taking in these lessons, needs to understand that it's not always going to work out. And just by doing the things the right way does not guarantee success. I mean, that's pain all over again, right?
Yeah, and don't become resentful when it doesn't work out, right? So if it doesn't work out and you become the lunatic, don't turn against the process of adaptation itself and become the anti-hero or the enemy. All right, that's kind of the I think, no matter what, preserve the Christic orientation, even in failure, even if you are regarded as a lunatic. As Christ, Christ basically what? That story, right? He's considered worthy of public crucifixion. Right? I don't know if you call that a lunatic per se, but he was, I don't know. What do you call that? Publicly demonized, really, right? Like they wanted to kill him.
I mean, if you take it down to the most mundane way of putting it, I mean, he failed if the definition of success is living.
Right.
But he succeeded by all other metrics. Basically. So, I mean, genius, lunatic, fine line again.
That's the inversion, right? Because in his failure, he achieved the ultimate success by revealing to us our true nature. Like that is the revelation of the incarnation as I understand it, right? It's like he revealed to us, oh, this is what you are. This is what we are. And so when you say like he died for our sins to redeem us, that's what it is, right? He's like holding up that mirror saying, here is the story of how you actually operate. And if you instead imitate me rather than imitating the crowd that slayed me, then you can usher in the ideal world or the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah, it's so powerful. And I mean, this is the reason for highlighting this passage is really to say that this whole process might not be, well, no, I shouldn't put it that way. This process is likely to not be painless. This is likely to not work perfectly, but it's better than all the other modes of being, and that's the point. Mm-hmm. A funny parallel, I guess, is the quote. I think this is Churchill, that democracy is the best form of government except for all the other ones, it's the worst form of government except for all the other ones, or something.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's particularly poignant these days in terms of talking about incentives and this and that. Maybe he wasn't exactly right about that one, but it's still, I think this is a process of elimination. There are other ways to live in the world, which are going to achieve worse results, almost guaranteed. Or there's this way to live in the world that is risky and challenging and is more than likely to end in failure by some metric. I don't know, but it's better than all the others in terms of psychological adaptation and just what we as humans are wired to do. Because that's another point of this book, really, is that it starts, the very beginning is starting with how people explore in the world and then the neurobiology of it, right? This is how we're wired. It really, really is. It's how all organisms on this planet, going back to the single-celled the first single-celled organism that split off into two, something like that.
Yeah.
Has this mode of adaptation built in. And we are saddled with the capability for abstract thought and the ability to think about the future, and the burden and the responsibility of those things can be overwhelming. But it's better to take that up than to, first of all, actively oppose it, but to ignore it and sit at another plane, another level. And so it's the call to adventure, the call to take up the cross. They're not easy. They're not easy things to do, but they're worth it.
Yes.
They're the most likely to be worth it.
Yes. And this is occurring to me now, but like the imitation of Christ runs so deep that even in how we respond to failure, I think we should imitate the resurrection of Christ, basically. Like that's what that story is telling us, right? There's this Confucius quote: "Our greatest glory is not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall." Right? The failure is part of trial and error. It's right there in the damn words, right? Trial and error. It's going to happen. You can't grow. You can't make any forward progress without failure, right? It is the other way I like to frame this. I think it's useful. It's like you're either winning or learning, right? You're only losing when you don't learn. If you fail to learn from your mistakes, then you are actually losing, right? If you repeat your mistakes, if you do this, that's what did Einstein say, the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, right? That would be losing. But if you're just failing or missing the mark, let's say sinning, so long as you're learning, then that's great. You're learning, right? You are setting yourself up for future success. And so even in the ultimate pain of being human, which is failure itself, I think there are lessons in the story of Christ and how to respond to that in the resurrection, right? It's like I'm now reminded of Batman Begins, right? Where he falls down the well and his father comes down and he goes, "Why do we fall, Bruce?" So what does he say? To prove ourselves that we can get back up again. I forget his exact wording, but basically that is the point, right? Is we are aiming goal-oriented creatures. The world is very complex and dangerous. You're going to miss, guaranteed. Like if you need one guarantee in life, that's it. You're going to miss. Like it's definitely going to happen at some point. How do you adapt to those misses? What is the best way to resurrect yourself, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and get back on track? That's what this story is. I mean, that's one aspect of what this story, I think, is telling us.
Oh, you got it. And I mean, the intentionality is one of the most important things about that too. Like, just go at it with intention, and at least you're not going to be the one that drowns in the flood, I guess.
Yeah.
And I think as far as a few of the other things that I had highlighted here, we've already touched on a little bit, like these points about abstract thinking and all this. I'm thinking some of what I have is now going to be a little bit on the repetitive side here. Did you want to move on to the next points that you had there?
Yeah. So I mean there's a lot here, and we're not going to hit all of it, honestly. I think we should maybe jump forward to the emergence of moral knowledge, which is my page 384.
Yeah.
And I'm skipping over some stuff that's really good here, actually, but I don't know, we only have so much time, and I think when I'm looking at the outline here, there's some stuff bolded at the bottom that we should definitely get to, I assume. So I want to talk about this because I think a lot of the value, and this is the value that Peterson rendered to me in his work, was taking mythology / religion, which I thought was kind of like fluffy fairy tale stuff, and repackaging it in a way that is very appealing to my semantic side, right? The side that's looking for, rigorous, logical, scientific explanation. And so he sort of filters mythology through that sieve and presents it in a way that is revelatory, to say the least. And I thought this particular area where he discusses the emergence of moral knowledge and its relationship to mythology was kind of capturing the essence of that. And so these are very short excerpts. I'm reading from page 384 of the PDF. Peterson writes, "The emergence of moral knowledge in explicit semantic form, as opposed to its implicit representation and narrative, appears represented in mythology as brought about by revelation. This revelation is reception of knowledge from a higher source. In this case, from the episodic to the semantic memory systems, from the mysterious domain of imagination to the concrete word." So maybe a useful definition of mythology, and I relate to this because as someone that had kind of a traumatic childhood, and I've gone to therapy since about that, I didn't know, I've always had kind of a bad episodic memory, which is memories of interpersonal interactions. So like people would often say, "Oh, do you remember that one time we did the thing or whatever, and you told this funny joke?" And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But then you ask me to remember, quotes and words and passages and things I read. I'm like, I got it. I'm much more adept at that than I am, much more adept with semantic memory than I am episodic memory. And so if we define mythology as something like the semantic encoding of humanity's collective episodic memory and procedural wisdom, that again, it's this blueprinting, right? This owner's manual. It's like we've observed ourselves acting for a long period of time, and we're distilling out the essence of all of that learning and putting it into our semantic memory, right? We're converting the episodic observations into semantic description for a long-term storage and reflection. This is like the process. This is the revelation, right? The revealing of ourselves to ourselves. And what Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So this mythological process is the process of making the unconscious patterns that we've been enacting over vast spans of time and making it conscious by writing it down, right? Encoding it in story, narrative, parable, metaphor. And so it's like mythology is the process of making the collective unconscious, which is another Jungian term, conscious. Or it's the movement from episodic, it's the movement from the observations of episodic human action into the semantic representation, or from walking the walk to talking the talk, right? Like we're reflecting on action. And in that reflection on our action, we can improve future action, right? We do this at the micro, we know this at the micro level of maturity, right? You go into the world, you probably made some mistakes in your teens or 20s, hard-headedly learning lessons the hard way, as many of us tend to do, at least in some domains. And then you change the way you act in the future, right? Because you've made mistakes in the past. So you incorporate lessons from those mistakes into your future action. Well, that also happens at the collective level. And I think that's what mythology is, right? We are codifying the deepest, most important lessons we learned about ourselves to reveal it to ourselves in the present. And that's why it's, the Bible's a living document. All of it's a living library or a living database, if you will, of humanity learning about himself, if you will. So that's why I thought this was just so important. It's like to try and frame up the indispensability of mythology
in kind of a secular wrapper or description. Obviously a theme we've belabored at this point, but I think that's the real value, right? We have this culture that's very enraptured with science and scientific approach to everything. It's like, well, okay, mythology is not anti-science. It's not opposite science. It underpins even the scientific enterprise, right? It underpins, I think, the development of human consciousness, which is why it's so deep and perhaps difficult at times to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that the idea that this stuff is the episodic memory of all of humanity, and all you have to do is listen or read or whatever it is, because
the semantic representation of the episodic experience of humanity, something like that, like the codification of, you have like discrete words that are codifying continuous observation and hopefully distilling out what's most useful.
Sure. Well, and I think the point there is definitely that ignoring this stuff is at our own peril, right?
Yes, of course.
Because
you're doomed.
Well, and there's just so much hubris, right, to ignoring the lessons of the past, right, or thinking that you have it all figured out, right? And I mean, that's the naive arrogance of everyone in their teens and 20s, basically. And
No.
I mean, it certainly explains some of the modern actions of young people who think that they know everything and know how to fix the world, right? When they haven't learned the lessons of the past, and no one individual can experience all of the lessons themselves in a real way. And it was funny that coincidentally I'm the same way about the episodic memory thing. For various reasons I'm weak there, but then remembering this stuff and internalizing these lessons and making them conscious is what has enabled me to live my life the way that I do, which has gotten me to a place that I'm proud of.
Yeah.
And my path forward is something hopeful, and I know I have to do a lot of work to fulfill that, but without being able to make these lessons conscious, as you said, there's no way I would have been able to understand the same body of wisdom only through my own actions and my own experience. And also, importantly, I wouldn't have gotten the same level of experience from the people who are directly in my life, right? And not to be harsh about it exactly, but I didn't have direct role models in my life who were teaching me the things that I've learned over the last decade or so of exploring this stuff. I know it's a little bit less than a decade since sort of finding all of this stuff, but the journey began a little earlier, but still it's like realizing that there are lessons that humanity as a whole can teach to the individuals of today. That's extremely powerful, and that's one of the reasons why I hope that if the people watching, everyone who watches and listens to this is gets something out of it, it's that this stuff does have something there, and I would love to be able to amplify that a little bit more. So that's one of the reasons I'm really glad we're doing this, honestly.
Yeah, likewise, honestly. And I think this is the core of the Peterson phenomenon, frankly, right? That he was speaking, he's relaying, he often says this himself. He didn't write this stuff. That's not his mythology. He's just sort of sharing it or broadcasting it, I guess, the core principles of this mythology to a generation of either fatherless men or men that are raised under non-traditional family structures, right? Like, and irreligious, largely irreligious, or an increasingly irreligious culture, right? So a lot of these
values. They weren't, well, the role model wasn't there for the children, for young men to imitate. The religion wasn't there, right, for young men to discover the principles of these things. And so because we were in this secularizing culture, well, then all of a sudden this guy appears on the scene that's speaking about those principles in a secularized language. And surprise, surprise, all these young men are like, oh, fuck yeah, be responsible, clean my room, step up my game, tell the truth. And it just resonates with us on the deepest level because that's who we are, right? And really, I think the Peterson phenomenon too is a demonstration of this human proclivity to imitate, right? People literally started showing up to his lectures in fine suits, and they start actually cleaning up their room, and they start. I mean, this podcast, to some extent, is a representation of that. I watched this guy. I admired him. He had a podcast. He told me that this digital revolution made the spoken word have the reach and permanence of the written word. And I was like, okay, I got to get on that train because this Bitcoin rabbit hole has a lot of ideas that need that. And so, yeah, I mean, it's right here. Like, it's happening. Like, everyone's, it's an open game, right? It's like, join in, right? And incorporate these principles into your life and watch, as you said, you go from a place in life where you're not proud of, you get closer, or maybe even get to a place in life that you are proud of, and you live a life that you're proud to call your own. Same for me. I was in like a dark place, and then found Peterson, started getting into the word, started doing this work, really trying to imitate Christ. And I also add Socrates to that mix. People like, Peterson introduced me to John Vervaeke. John Vervaeke introduced me to D.C. Schindler, and all of their writings on Plato and Socrates. Like, that has been also very useful for getting your critical thinking, rationality, wisdom game on track. And it's incredible. This is what we are, basically. We are imitative creatures, and we need role models. And it's not like a choice. It's not like, oh, I can have one or not have one. It's like, you're going to be imitating someone, so you might as well set your moral aim high.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. And I mean, I was just thinking this today. I was with a group of parents of young kids doing a first aid course, like just how to act if something happens to your kid. And I was just watching other parents acting with their kids, and just looking at the ways they're interacting. And it's like, oh yeah, maybe I'll do this with him, or like I can play that way or something like that. And it's like, and so it's down to literally, like, it's in every aspect. I was just that came to mind today, and it's just.
Sports, like, if you ever played a sport, how did you learn, right? Someone showed you the movements. If you ever shot a gun, someone showed you the movements. Whatever, anything you do, right? We learn through imitation.
Well, and another point that I think the difference between our two specific paths, because there's a lot of similarities, and of course, one of these core things is the Peterson to Bitcoin pipeline, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we also have other not secondary, but we have other influences, right? And that's important. It's important to try to find so many different things, find the lessons everywhere. And the Peterson angle is just one. Like, I really also want to be clear about this. This is an angle that worked for me to help me figure out how this stuff works in the world. And the entire concept that we've talked about is in terms of finding the owner's manual and all this. It's like, yes, read this stuff and you do get an owner's manual. I shout that from the rooftops, absolutely. But the thing is, as long as you take a path to living life in a good way, an upright, upstanding way, and living the heroic mode of being, it doesn't matter which way you got there.
Right.
You don't have to learn this stuff explicitly. You really don't. It's just that I think having it out there that this is one way to do it is important. But all the power to everyone who figures out how to live life in a good way, their own way.
There are many paths to the top of the mountain, as they say. And
one really useful definition of intelligence I've heard is the ability to select different means to pursue the same end. All right. So like, yeah, and apply your intelligence and choose your path. But, I guess the bottom of it's like, yeah, sure. There's like almost infinite paths to take, but somehow Christ, and I'm again using Christ as the meta hero archetypal narrative here, is part of all of them, right? You can't dispense with that. That's the one thing you can't not do, because that is the process of adaptation itself. And without the process of adaptation itself, you will not move forward. You will regress. So if you're going to go up the mountain, no matter what path, you have to incorporate this heroic principle into your being, because that is, again, the trial and error, the rising and falling. Like, it's the necessary dynamic of forward movement or upward movement in this metaphor. So that's, yeah, it's deep, man. It's crazy. But I wish someone had explained this to me, like explained it to me this way as a kid, because I remember going to church and being like, what is all this hocus pocus bullshit? Like, I mean, I could feel that there was some, it felt like there was a good feel good element to it, people coming together, but I couldn't get the substance of the stories, right? I wasn't, sometimes you like sort of see a moral in the story, but it felt like something as arbitrary as a Saturday morning cartoon, it's like, oh, there's a moral in all these different stories. But wow,
when Saturday morning cartoons were just as archetypal as the.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the cartoon.
But yeah, the way though, it was like stuck in the dogmatism of it, and I wish exactly the same thing. It's a shame.
Are you sick of being robbed by politicians through inflation and endless money printing? If so, you need to be at Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville, Tennessee on July 25th through 27th. As the largest Bitcoin and Fintech conference in the world, Bitcoin 2024 stands as a beacon of monetary freedom, a glimmer of hope amongst a darkening macroeconomic backdrop. Top speakers, companies, and thought leaders from across the industry will convene in Nashville to look ahead to the next year and beyond. I will be there, and Bitcoin conferences like this have become my favorite place to socialize since becoming a Bitcoiner. Ticket prices will increase soon. Get your tickets now and secure your spot at this game-changing event. So go to b.tc/conference and use discount code Breedlove to sign up for the Bitcoin 2024 conference. Again, that's b.tc/conference, discount code Breedlove.
Over the past 9 years, I've been going through a pretty serious struggle with my personal health. It started with a sharp pain and stiffness in my hip after a lifting injury, which I later learned was related to some pretty extensive inflammation in my gut. Then I developed an autoimmune issue, and soon I was having joint pain all over, skin irritations, and all kinds of digestive issues. I visited many doctors trying to figure out what was wrong, but none of them were able to help me fix any of my issues. I eventually started to see an energy healer with whom I had some limited success, but it wasn't until I started working with the biohacker Anthony DiClementi last year that I was finally able to start making real progress on my healing journey. Anthony spent a lot of time with me learning about my specific situation and worked with me to adapt a custom health plan to address my needs. Anthony has served as a personal biohacker for celebrities, billionaires, and professional athletes all over the world. Besides helping people like me overcome health issues, Anthony and his world-class medical team also help guys that just want to optimize their cognitive performance, guys that want to pack on some muscle, and guys that just want to get shredded. Anthony keeps a tight book of business and is selective about the clients he brings on. To apply for Anthony's biohacking services, text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. Again, to apply for Anthony's biohacking services, just text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. All right, so I'm going to read one more excerpt on page 386, and then we can jump down to some of the bolded things you had. At the top of 386, Peterson writes, translation of tradition into law makes verbally abstract what had previously been at best encoded in image, makes the morality of the culture and the moral individual conscious for the first time. This act of transformation, culminating in a qualitative shift of cognitive sophistication in the intrapsychic activity of a mythologized culture hero, constitutes the consequence of centuries of abstract adaptive endeavor. And so I think this is kind of just to put a button on the previous point of discussion, is that this is like mythology as something like the semantic hardware upon which episodic human cognitive software, right, our actual how we act, basically, it can iterate and update itself based on this repository or this database. And it's like when we use that term self-reflection again, right? Like if you've made mistakes in the past, you're living in the future, well, you're going to reflect on your mistakes from the past, right? You're self-reflecting, like, oh, I've been in this situation or something like it before. This is where it went wrong. Here's how I'm going to act differently this time. That mythology is like that mirror image itself, or the reflection of our continuous process of self-reflection or collective self-reflection, right? We're keep looking back at how we have acted across time and where we've gone wrong and what we've done right. And mythology is like that mirror image, something like that.
Yeah, and it completely ties into this idea that this is just the best of the best that made it down the centuries, down the millennia, because it was the most true that there was. There's no point in telling stories that weren't actually reflective of the real thing. Of course, there's history, the remembrance of facts and all this, like this hero did this thing at this date and etc. But that's only going to get wrapped up into the archetypal mythology if that action is in line with the ultimate truth. And yeah, I mean the concept of law that starts to be in this chapter, because although we've skipped over a little bit of this chapter, and there's more also we're going to pass over. A lot of this stuff is like, I encourage if you're listening to read this and take a look, but there are subtleties being added on here, and the law is one of them, where it's sort of the collective group understanding of the world at any one point in time. And this is one of the criticisms, I think, of and the valid criticisms of the Old Testament, that it was a description of what was working best for a specific group of people, specifically the Jews who had just escaped Egypt and were wandering in the desert of the Sinai Peninsula for 40 years. That was specifically the law that was required to keep that culture going, and that's what was recorded and was passed down. And layers were added on top of that and all this, but the sticking to the literal truth of that is the mistake. That the law as such is the thing that needs to be transcended by the hero, basically. And well, the funny thing is, I think the exact actual parallel to this that in examples and part of the chapter and all this is getting at is that, yeah, Christ did that. Christ specifically transcended that specific part of the law. And I mean, this is again one of those problems with modern evangelical Christianity that I have, is the adherence to dogmatism, right? Especially when there's quotations of Bible verses from the Old Testament that are out of context. It's like, yeah, okay, like maybe this is saying some message that is morally right somehow. But on the other hand, it could just be justification from a snapshot of the law. I'm using it in the way Peterson is using it here, the snapshot of the moral principles that worked in one snapshot of time, and trying to use that 5,000 years later. It's just not going to work. The heroic adaptation has gotten beyond that. And maybe it's actually true that the distillation of all of the entire corpus of the Bible got distilled down to that great commandment, those two things. And maybe that's the lesson. A couple of the things that I've highlighted touch on this a little bit more, but that's just my first thoughts on this kind of law concept.
That's great. Should we, I think it's your page 382, it's my page 390.
Yeah.
To the excerpt about myths of a culture as its central stories.
Yes. Me or you?
I'll let you take this one because you have the highlight.
Sounds good. It's long, but I think the whole thing is needed. The myths of a culture are its central stories. These stories provide a dramatic record of the historically predicated transformation of human intent and appear to exist as the episodic or semantic embodiment of history's cumulative effect on action. The mythical narratives that accompany retention of historically determined behavior constitute non-empirical, episodic representation of that behavior and its method of establishment. Myth is purpose, coded in episodic memory. Mythic truth is informative, derived from past experience, derived from past observation of behavior, relative from the perspective of fundamental motivation and affect. Myth simultaneously provides a record of historical essential in terms of behavior and programs those historical essentials. Narrative provides semantic description of action in image, back translatable into imaginary episodic events capable of eliciting imitative behavior. Mythic narrative offers dramatic presentation of morality, which is the study of what should be. Such narrative concerns itself with the meaning of the past, with the implications of past existence for current and future activity. This meaning constitutes the ground for the organization of behavior. And I'll pause here just to basically highlight that this is like one paragraph exactly talking about everything that we've just been discussing, I think.
Yeah. I just want to say that is absolute fire. That writing is, it crystallizes everything we've been talking about at length.
Yeah, and just as an attempt to cut down on this a little bit slightly, because there's a couple more paragraphs here that maybe aren't quite exactly fully on the money, but the point that I was looking to basically highlight here is that this is the reason why we're studying this stuff, and then take this one further layer here. It goes, history protects man against overwhelming material and spiritual onslaught. It performs this function by providing a framework of meaning for those enmeshed within it. History conceived of in this manner comprises those a priori assumptions all cultures base themselves on, which guide the action of individuals enraptured by the spirit of the times. This framework of meaning is by necessity predicated upon various articles of faith and can be described in its totality as a myth, although it also precedes myth. That's interesting. The highest levels of myth provide man with the capacity to attribute meaning to or to discover meaning within the tragedy of each individual human life, forever blessed and cursed by society, forever threatened and redeemed by the unknown. To live at this mythic level, rather than to hide, means the possibility of reaching and perhaps exceeding the highest stage of consciousness yet attained or conceptualized by a particular culture. This mythic life is symbolically represented by the Savior, the individual who embodies the essential aspects of the mythological drama. In the Western tradition, for better or worse, like it or not, that individual is Christ. Total mic drop, right?
Total. Yeah. I wish people that identify myth with untruth could read these handful of paragraphs and really sit with them for a while, because it's, mythos, right? Mythos is, John Vervaeke chooses to use that term instead because myth has been so identified with untruth, right? That he uses the term mythos instead. And it is this process we're describing, right? This process of, well, I can't say it any better than he just said it. Basically, I don't even know what to say. It's just, if you're listening to this podcast, just hit back 30 seconds 4 times and listen to that 2 minutes again, because it's that good. And we've mentioned this before, but Peterson said he rewrote every sentence in this book 50 times. And I think it shows, honestly. I kind of believe the guy. It's so dense, but so on point.
Yeah, I mean, I have new appreciation for his writing now that I'm attempting to undertake a writing type endeavor of my own here, and it's just, this is seriously some amazing stuff. And actually, the one point in the middle that I thought was interesting, one of the most interesting things here, is that the spirit of the times is in its totality a myth, although it precedes myth.
Yeah.
And that's just completely getting it's almost, it's just an aside, but it's like the actions of today are going to echo into eternity. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
the myths of 1,000 years from now are being written now.
Yes.
What are you doing with your life? That's what that says to me.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Reminds me of Joseph Campbell said the job of the artist is to mythologize the present for future generations. And then we are each our own, obviously that's art, but you are your own masterpiece. Like, your life is your artwork. It's unavoidably your artwork. You can't, that's what life is, right? You are actually creating yourself. And so your actions really matter, right? They matter for you and for those around you and for those who will come after you. And to take that seriously, that's where you step into that notion that Peterson puts forth, which I think he got from Carl Jung as well, that it was an adequate substitute for psychotherapy to just set your moral aim as high as you could possibly conceive of it and work towards that end. And like, you don't need psychotherapy. You just do that and your life will reconfigure itself in a positive way. And it's just incredibly powerful. And I don't know, it feels like I think we'll necessarily rediscover this. I'm not saying like this podcast is going to be the thing that helps people rediscover it. I hope it helps some people. But I think in the digital age, the information age, where we are communicating more quickly, right? The information flows more with higher liquidity and more seamlessly, that we're going to rediscover this ancient wisdom, right? You already see glimmers of it, like, yoga becoming popular, ancestral diets, all of this, like fasting, ancient things that we've known about, meditation, we've known about for a very long time, seems to be like coming to the surface again as a result of widespread telecommunications. And that's exciting, right?
I mean, I think the first step is just respecting this stuff, that we as a species have been in the same form for, 210,000 years, as in the anatomical capacity for our brains has been in the same configuration for that long, right?
Yeah.
Can you imagine being in this world 200,000 years ago, being the same level of intelligent, you know, there's something there. There's absolutely something that's gotten passed down. And I mean, I think there's nothing but good to just respect that which has been passed down. Don't take it for dogma,
Right.
but respect it. The dogma is the enemy.
Yeah.
And I mean that properly from what Peterson has been saying. The by taking things too literally and forcing control over those around you, that's fascistic. That's wrong.
Yeah.
But respecting it, that's the first step. And so don't be iconoclastic. Don't tear down the institutions for the sake of tearing them down. Reform and take the good, leave the bad, and move forward, something like that. And I mean, I understand that this can be interpreted hypocritically as someone speaking for and advocating for the overthrow of the current financial system. But I mean it seriously, that it's keep the good. And if something does not have any good in it, then okay, then it needs to be purged and made anew. But doing that is not something to be taken lightly. And doing something like that the wrong way is also possible and can be incredibly destructive. Overthrowing one system, overthrowing a tyranny and putting another tyranny in its place is the wrong thing. But as individuals deciding to opt out and choose something new, choose something better, that is entirely righteous and entirely aligned with the mode of being that Peterson is talking about. And respect for the wisdom of the past is, I think, a central point there.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I mean, I would suggest caution, really, on the metaphor. Actually, that I don't view Bitcoin as overthrowing anything. Actually, right? The fiat financial system is the flood, like literally, right? It's a flood of artificial liquidity that drowns everyone in hyperinflation eventually, right? Gradually, then suddenly. So independent of Bitcoin, agnostic of Bitcoin, that thing self-destructs, as we've seen time and time and time and time again. I would metaphorize Bitcoin as something more like the ark, right? It is the ark that lets us survive the flood. And there's a lot there too, right? Like Noah was the man that walked with God and was favored by God, and something about adhering to these principles that Bitcoin represents. Well, they correspond closely with what we see here in the Bible, right? And so, yeah, it's I hate, because you're right. People are like, oh, who are these guys? They're talking about overthrowing, but it's like, no, we're not. I don't think we are. I'm not overthrowing anything. I just put my purchasing power in something that can't be violated. That's all I did. I didn't overthrow anything. The thing overthrows itself, right? Because it's a self-destructive enterprise. That's proven. Let's say that's evidenced both theoretically when you look at it through the lens of Austrian economics, the Austrian business cycle theory, all of that, and then also empirically when you just study the history of money and fiat currencies, what actually happens. Well, kaboom, kaboom, kaboom. So yeah, I think as Bitcoiners, this is the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is like it's a bloodless revolution. You just vote with your purchasing power. I'm going to hold it in the thing that's ethical and good and true and can't be stolen. It serves my individual self-interest while simultaneously serving the collective self-interest. And as its purchasing power grows in my life, and to the extent that I embody these principles, not just from Bitcoin, but from where Bitcoin has led us, right? We both, or I don't know, for you, it's the opposite direction.
I watched that movie Tenet last night. It's like, have you seen that movie?
Oh yeah, no, I haven't.
The movie's an absolute trip. Very hard to understand, but it's like we've come at it from two different directions, basically.
Got it.
And yeah, the extent to which you incorporate those principles into your life and become worthy of imitation, like that's the extent to which we actually push the world in the right direction. So, yeah, I would reject the labeling of Bitcoiners as overthrowing or subverting anything. Like, frankly, no, we're just making an individual ethical decision that benefits us individually and humanity collectively. Getting on the arc, basically.
Yeah, I love it, and I mean that's the right message, right? The other Jung quote, I think we've mentioned it before, but one of my favorites is the where it says, "Find out what myth you're living, because you might not like what it tells you," or something like that. I always grab it, and it's never exactly the right one, but find out what myth you're living. That's one of the things here, and the myth that we're all living, is one where the flood is imminent, as you said. And so what's the answer there? Find the ark. What's the ark? Bitcoin. Yeah, and I think to pull it back to kind of the points we've been discussing here, and everything to do with just finding the myth and living it, and living the Savior, living towards the image of the Savior. That stuff all is just it's simultaneously the call to responsibility and the solution. It's the number 42. It's just so simplistic, and it doesn't at all mean that it's going to work out perfectly for every individual. But I mean, the Bitcoiners that I meet, that where everyone is just able to work on their passion, and who find this thing and go down the rabbit hole and know that this is way more important. Bitcoin is the highest good that I can conceive of. I can't think of any specific thing that is more important in my lifetime to focus on. And so to the extent that I am as all in as I can be right now, and I wish I could be more so, but that's what I'm focusing on. And that's what this book, Dr. Peterson, everything has taught me, and Bitcoin is the thing that emerges. And well, I'm looking forward to next time to get into the alchemical bits of this, but yeah, a good call for not attempting to squeeze that into this session.
As am I. Should we hit this last excerpt?
Yeah, two more actually.
Okay.
The last and second to last, and I think you'll like this one. I've got it queued up if that works.
I'll let you take the second to last, and I'll do the last one because I have that one queued up.
Perfect. Law is a necessary precondition to salvation, so to speak. Necessary but insufficient. Law provides the borders that limit chaos and allows for the protected maturation of the individual. Law disciplines possibility and allows the disciplined individual to bring his or her potentialities, those intrapsychic spirits, under voluntary control. The law allows for the application of such potentiality to the task of creative and courageous existence, allows spiritual water-controlled flow into the valley of the shadow of death. Law held as absolute, however, puts man in the position of the eternal adolescent, dependent upon the father for every vital decision, removes the responsibility for action from the individual, and therefore prevents him or her from discovering the potential grandeur of the soul. Life without law remains chaotic, effectively intolerable. Life that is pure law becomes sterile, equally unbearable. The domination of chaos or sterility equally breeds murderous resentment and hatred. Christ presented the kingdom of heaven, the archetypal goal, as a spiritual kingdom, which is to say, a psychological, then interpersonal state. This state differed from the hypothetical promised land described in the Old Testament in a number of vitally important manners. First, its construction was a matter of voluntarily chosen alteration in personal attitude and outlook, rather than a culmination of material labor and natural resource. Second, it was predicated upon revolutionary and paradoxical reconceptualization of the nature of the manner of being. Reconceptualization of the nature of the goal of paradise itself. Christ's life and words, as archetypal exemplars of the heroic manner of being, place explicit stress on the process of life rather than upon its products. The point of a symphony is not its final note, although it proceeds inexorably to that end. Likewise, the purpose of human existence is not the establishment of some static, perfect manner of being. Man would find such perfection intolerable, as Dostoevsky was at pains to illustrate. Rather, human purpose is generative of the ability to concentrate on the innately interesting and affectively significant events of the present, with sufficient consciousness and clarity to render concern about the past and future unnecessary. Yeah. The meaning of life.
Yeah, I like the framing that law is necessary but not sufficient. All right, it's the proverbial stick, but it's not a carrot, right? It's just a disincentive, not an incentive to ethical behavior, ethical action, let's say. And I'm reminded here of something Jeff Booth said to me on this show, which is that money is superordinate to law, right? There is the carrot element in money. And as Peterson wrote there, law removes the responsibility of action, right? That, well, you just need to follow, basically, right? Not lead, just follow the rules, follow the law, not necessarily lead and break any new ground. Whereas, money, I'll say Bitcoin, really, to get more specific, because frankly, that is the answer to the question, right? What is money? Well, Bitcoin is money, guys. If you haven't figured it out by now, that's kind of the answer to that show. Bitcoin, so if law removes the responsibility of action, Bitcoin energizes the responsibility of action. All right, you can't not be responsible with Bitcoin. Otherwise, it's not going to work for you. And so that is, the hero, right? That is the hero. He who takes responsibility, what's that Bob Dylan quote I picked up at the ARC forum? It says, a hero is someone who understands the responsibility that comes along with his freedom. And that's Bitcoin, man. Bitcoin lets you be heroic in that it opens up your spectrum of freedom, but with that great power comes great responsibility, as Uncle Ben told Spidey.
Man, just you saying that it's like, it's so obvious, but it's so ignored. And it's like, this is it. This is the answer.
It's the cornerstone the builders rejected.
Yes. Yeah, I love it. I love it. And I mean, that was another long passage, but I think it's immensely important to understanding what this book is actually saying. It's you have to live within the bounds of order, but if order becomes too stifling, then it has to be regenerated and overthrown. Not in the iconoclastic way, but the tyranny has to be regenerated. We talked about this a bunch. But you can't live without it. You can't live completely without order. Otherwise, nature is cruel and will consume everything. It's why nature, chaos, has that second level to it, the dragon, which is going to consume everything eventually. But, it's the heat death of the universe eventually. But at the center is the hero, mediating between the two. And you can be that hero, but you have to undertake it voluntarily and with full understanding of what the responsibility is. And, well, that's the message. And adopting Bitcoin on its own without taking up that mantle of responsibility and being the hero in your own life. Bitcoin is just a thing. It's going to go up and it's going to do stuff. Great stuff, hopefully. But if you don't fix yourself, take up that responsibility yourself, well, then, as you say, it's not actually going to work for you, is it?
That's right.
I love it. To me, this is the summation of the entire series, and actually, I think that's sort of true. The alchemy section that we have coming up, which is going to be great and absolutely fantastic. To me, in reading that, it's like this is the extra rabbit hole on top, like the extra bonus, insane thing. That's just awesome. But this is the lesson, and I love it. I've loved getting to explore this with you, man. Like, really, I think this has been awesome.
Yeah, man. Likewise, it's incredible, and it feels like we're at kind of a pinnacle of some kind in the book. But there's this whole other thing. There's this whole other thing right around the corner. This whole alchemy thing that, in many ways, it is the most philosophically tantalizing and fascinating dimension of Bitcoin, and the connections between Christ and Bitcoin. And I know it sounds crazy, but just join us next time to check out the conversation on alchemy, because it's a trip, man, to say the least. I will read then this last excerpt. This is on your page 398 and my PDF page 407. Peterson writes, Christ said, "Put truth and regard for the divine in humanity above all else, and everything you need will follow. Not everything you think you need, as such thought is fallible and cannot serve as an accurate guide, but everything actually necessary to render acutely self-conscious life bearable, without protection of delusion and necessary recourse to deceit, avoidance, or suppression and violence. This idea is presented in imagistic form in Figure 61, the world tree of death and redemption, which portrays the host as the second fruit of the world tree. Ingestion of the fruit of the first fruit produced the fall. Ingestion of the second redeems those who have fallen. The negative feminine in the form of Eve hands out the apple in the form of a skull. The positive feminine in the form of the church distributes the wheaten wafers that characterize the Redeemer. The incorporation of Christ's mystic body during the ritual of the Mass is dramatic representation of the idea that the hero must be incorporated into each individual, that everyone must partake of the essence of the Savior. Existence characterized by such essence takes place, from the Oriental viewpoint, on the path of meaning, in Tao, balanced on the razor's edge between mythic masculine and mythic feminine, balanced between the potentially stultifying safety of order and the inherently destructive possibility of chaos. Such existence allows for introduction of sufficiently bearable meaning into blessed security, makes every individual a stalwart guardian of tradition,
and an intrepid explorer of the unknown, ensures simultaneous advancement and maintenance of stable, dynamic social existence, and places the individual family on the path to intrapsychic integrity and spiritual peace. And he concludes with some scripture here. Therefore, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them, I will liken him to a wise man, which built his house upon a rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, and it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock. Matthew 7:24-25. And that's it. Man, you hear those scriptures in the context of everything we've laid out today, for me, become much, much more meaningful. And I hope the same is true for others.
Yeah, this conclusion is, it. The hero must be incorporated into every individual. And by building the house on the rock, it will withstand anything that might come against it. The calling is to adopt the mantle of the hero. There isn't anything else to it. And of the savior. And no matter how hard it is to do it and to live like that, it's powerful. I feel like I've said all there is to that I'm gonna have to say on this topic. Honestly, it's this is a powerful section to a powerful book. And it's not even the end. It's not even the summation. But this is it. Out of all of the sessions we've had in this series, the episodes we've recorded so far, this one strikes me as if those who have followed along with this entire thing, this is the payoff. And then there's more to come, but this is the payoff. It feels like that for me.
Yeah, and that's really saying something, because we've had some epic rips in this series. I'm really grateful that you encouraged me to jump back into this book. I'd wanted to do a series on it for a long time, but never found the right dialogical partner. And this has been amazing. And this really is it. Yeah, this is the pinnacle of the book. I guess you could call the Alchemy the after party. I don't know. It's so good too. The celebration, I don't know. It's well, come next time and you'll see. It's crazy. I will conclude by echoing Matthew here and say, it is my hope that we can build the house of civilization on the rock of Bitcoin.